Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Bruce McNamer. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Washington Community Foundation. And
I'm Kristy Greenwalt. I'm the director of the city's Interagency Council on Homelessness.
And we and the city are thrilled to welcome you today and to thank you all for joining this important discussion about private sector engagement in addressing homelessness. Now, there was a time when ending homelessness in the district seemed impossible, at least to me, as somewhat of an outsider looking in and in reading the occasional news story. But as I've dug deeper into this issue and spent time with our colleagues in the district, I've come to believe what they already knew, that homelessness is in fact solvable. Homelessness has not always existed the way it did today. It is a product of our systems and our policies and our civic choices. And therefore, it's within our power to fix it.
That's right, and I can tell you that's something that Mayor Bowser certainly believed. And when she came into office in 2015, one of the first things she did was charge her Interagency Council on Homelessness with developing a strategic plan. At the time, like in many cities across America, homelessness in the district felt very akin to a runaway freight train. Our numbers were escalating at a really frighteningly rapid clip. And as many of you know, the district is one of just a few jurisdictions in the country that has a legal right to shelter. And at that time, the district was responding to this growing affordable housing crisis by adding more and more shelter. And while shelter, it is of course important when people are in the midst of a crisis that they have somewhere safe to go immediately, we know that shelter is ultimately not the solution to homelessness. Housing is. So we got to work with our data, and we spent a lot of time looking at how many people are experiencing homelessness in the district, how many have been homeless for very long periods of time, how many folks are newly entering our system, what are their characteristics, what barriers do they face in our system to getting the help they need, and ultimately what housing interventions do they need. And out of that work, the Homeward DC plan was born. And since then, we've been heads down on implementation. We are now in our fourth year of implementation. Mayor Bowser has been growing her investments in this plan year after year, with the funding coming in the FY20 budget, the most significant that we have seen yet. And even more importantly, I know Mayor Bowser believes that it's not enough just to fix our homeless crisis response system, but that we are simultaneously working on expanding our affordable housing stock more generally in the city. Towards that end, she's also investing $100 million, more than $100 million per year, to help us build that stock of affordable and supportive housing.
And as many of you know, the city's efforts are paying off. We've been watching this work closely over the last few years, and it's remarkable that under this administration, homelessness in the district has decreased 22% since 2016, when the city's Homeward DC plan was first implemented. In particular, family homelessness has dropped a remarkable 45% in this time period. I think it's a testament to the mayor's leadership, the city's commitment of resources, a great strategic plan, and capable implementation of that plan.
And you know, Mayor Bowser has been unwavering in her commitment and quite honestly fearless when some of the choices that had to be made were not always easy choices to be made, and often, quite honestly, politically unpopular. But she has believed in the plan and believed in her team, and that has really helped us drive the needle on homelessness. I also want to point out that our implementing agencies have been nothing short of amazing, and especially thinking about representatives from our Department of Human Services, who some of them who are here today, if you guys want to just wave. The Department of Human Services has a really important and difficult job of not only managing the human crisis that homelessness is in front of our eyes every day, but we are simultaneously asking them to do the hard work of systems transformation. So that's realigning and reworking policies, standing up new programs, recompeting contracts. We don't get to press pause on the world while we do all that work. So they have a very big job, and they're led under the very capable leadership of our friend and colleague, Laura Zeilinger. I also want to call out the partnership of our Department of Housing and Community Development. We have staff from the DHCD team here today. Polly Donaldson, our director at DHCD, will be joining us shortly. These two agencies are some of the very most important implementing partners that we have on the Homeward DC plan, and Those agencies, along with the 33 other members that sit around the ICH table, are really the partners bringing this plan to life.
So, if all these amazing things are happening, why are we here today? And the answer to the question is, I think for all of us, an easy one. Yes, we're making progress, but we have a very, very long way to go. On any given night in the district, there are some 6,500 individuals, youth, and families without a safe place to sleep. And while the homeless services system has made great improvements, the broader landscape continues to grow more challenging for those at the lowest rungs of the economic ladder. Housing prices continue to escalate, income inequality continues to intensify, and DC is very much a tale of two cities. One very prosperous and continuing to grow, and another where lifelong residents are being forced out of their homes and their communities. No longer is simply having a job enough to protect you against homelessness. In the district, at the current minimum wage of $13.25 an hour, a person would have to work nearly 3 full-time jobs to afford an apartment suitable for a family. More and more, we see people in the homeless services system who are working. It is estimated that 30% of adults experiencing homelessness are actually employed, while others are wanting to work but struggling to maintain a job because of the instability of their housing situation.
And that's right. So despite the positive changes that we're seeing in our homeless services system, we know that the landscape is growing more and more difficult. Far too many of our neighbors are living on a very, very thin edge. Nationally, we know that only 1 out of every 4 households that needs housing assistance gets it, and the same is true in the district. So we have a lot of folks that really need that deep, affordable housing assistance and are not getting it. So our homeless services system is getting more efficient. We're helping people move out of homelessness faster back into affordable housing, but we're seeing more and more people flowing into our system. In fact, we've had a 20% increase in the number of people flowing into our system since the plan was actually launched. Those are alarming numbers to us, and again, as Bruce said, that's exactly why we're here today.
Yeah, and to reinforce the point that local government alone cannot begin to address all the underlying causes of homelessness or provide all the services, funding, and financing for interventions. There are gaps and roles that are more suited for philanthropy and the private sector, where funding is more flexible, can be more nimble, experimental, and responsive to an ever-changing landscape, and can fund advocacy and awareness to support broader efforts. Now is the time for the private sector to engage in this fight. This work requires our collective effort involving government, nonprofits, philanthropists, businesses, and concerned citizens. That is all of us, the people in this room, all of us working together. So that is why the Greater Washington Community Foundation and Mayor Bowser's Interagency Council on Homelessness have joined forces to launch the public-private partnership to end homelessness in DC. Over several years, we will be committing tens of millions of dollars in grants and investments, including investments to increase the supply of permanent supportive housing and very deeply affordable housing, support services to help people exit homelessness and obtain permanent housing, as well as advocacy and communications. But more than that, we will be harnessing the imagination, the talents, energy, and resources of people in this room, representing multiple sectors and partners and inspiring models from across the country.
And just talking with many of you before this session began during breakfast, I know many of you have questions specifically about what's happening in the district, some of the things you've read in the papers, what is our plan all about, what are our numbers saying, and we'll have sessions in the future where we can go deep with you all on the landscape in the district. But today we're very fortunate and honored to have guests from 4 other communities who are here to talk to us about what's happening in their communities. And so today you'll hear from a panel of corporate executives from Cisco, Zillow, Kaiser Permanente, and Salesforce. And we're very excited to have them here to talk about why they felt the call to get involved in homelessness, why they feel urgency about this issue, and why they think the private sector has a role to play.
So we have a lot going for us in the district. We have political will and strong leadership. We have a healthy tax base and a well-managed city. We have experts at the top of their field guiding these reform efforts, and we are at a scale where addressing homelessness is completely feasible. And at the same time, the forces of housing inaffordability are relentless. If we are not moving aggressively forward, we will backslide, and we cannot wait. So now is the time, and nowhere is there a better place to demonstrate that solving homelessness is possible than right here in the nation's capital. We have the opportunity to become a model for other cities to follow. Later, you'll have an opportunity to learn more about the partnership and ways that you can contribute from my colleague, Tonia Wellons, our VP of Community Investment. But before we start the panel discussion, I do want to acknowledge a few special guests and initial partners who have made early contributions to this initiative. The Community Foundation is a co-convener of the Housing Leaders Group of Greater Washington, which is a leading voice in promoting the priority of more housing affordability solutions across the Greater Washington region to ensure our economic sustainability and quality of life for all. Our partnership initiative is one important element within HLG's current Capital Region Housing Challenge, which launched this spring. The challenge is working to secure $1 billion in new public and private funding across the full spectrum of housing affordability and need. And David and Melissa are both here from the HLG. We appreciate their leadership. I also want to acknowledge the Clark Foundation for making a $1 million gift to help seed the partnership's grant-making fund. The fund itself will provide support to build a capacity of local DC nonprofits working to help more of our neighbors exit homelessness into permanent housing. Later this summer, we will be announcing our first competitive grant round for our nonprofit partners. But thank you to the Clark Foundation for your partnership and generosity, which is making this possible. I know our friends from the Clark Foundation are here today as well, so thank you very much. And we are fortunate to have the support of Bank of America, which has generously sponsored this event. So now we'd like to invite Larry to Rita, the External Affairs Executives and newly named the Greater Washington Market President for the Bank of America, and I will say a public servant in his own right, to share a few remarks. Larry?
Thanks very much, Bruce, and thanks, Kristy. We're very pleased to be part of this partnership and to be here today. There's no question but that Washington is indeed making great strides in this area, and there's work to be done, as Bruce and Kristy outlined. We operate, Bank of America, we're very pleased to be part of this, but we do it because of how we operate, and I'm very pleased to be joined by several of my teammates today who know this very well and work with their clients in this basis too. When we engage in communities where we operate, and we have more than 2,000 teammates that are in the Washington, D.C. market, we do it by asking the question, what would you like the power to do? That's sort of an animating principle for our company. And when we talk to the Community Foundation, they would like the power to end homelessness, and that's an entirely laudable goal, and it's the right goal. And we're very pleased to be part of it. We're particularly excited by the partnership that's been developed here today because, frankly, it's only the private sector and the means and the capital that the private sector can attract and deploy that's going to be able to help solve this problem. There isn't enough philanthropy in the world. There isn't enough government spending in the world. It's all important, and we do our part, and Bank of America provides about $5 million a year in pure philanthropy every year in this market, but in the last year or so, we've also mobilized capital through our ordinary business operations as a bank, and we have other colleagues from other financial institutions in the company, in the room doing the same thing, mobilizing capital on the order of $100 million in the last couple of years to support almost 400 affordable housing units in this city. So philanthropy is critical, government spending is critical, but it's going to be the private sector working together with partners in our ordinary course of what we do for a living. As a bank, we attract capital, we deploy capital, and it's going to be other partners from other sectors, and we're going to hear from some of them this morning, in their ordinary course of how they develop a sustainable business framework that will attack these kinds of problems like homelessness in the district. So we're excited to be part of this. The leadership that you're bringing and that the mayor indeed is bringing to this is impressive. We're humbled and proud to be part of that, and we're going to do our part. So thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you, Larry. We are so proud and honored to have you as our partner here today. So now we're going to get into sort of the main event, our panel discussion. And so I want to introduce you to our moderator. For those of us in the homeless services field, Oliva is someone who needs no introduction. Ann served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Special Needs at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, where she oversaw HUD's multi-billion-dollar homelessness and special needs housing portfolio. She led the department through a major transformation of the homeless services programs in this country, leading us all towards systems approaches and evidence-based practices like permanent supportive housing and housing first. Ann now serves as a senior policy advisor at the Corporation for Supportive Housing. And word on the street has it when the folks on the Hill have a question about HUD's programs, they don't call Dr. Carson's team, they call Ann. Ann also knows our Ann also knows our community very well. She actually started her career at the Community Partnership for the Prevention of Homelessness here in DC. And so she is a dear friend and colleague, and there's no better expert to lead this panel. So, Ann?
I'm incredibly proud that the district is pulling together this partnership that we're talking about today, because in communities that are making the most progress, we have fully aligned policy making and strategies and investments across all of these sectors. So it's so important, and I want to thank everybody for being here today, for taking the time to be with us to talk about this issue. And I also want to thank Kristy and Bruce for inviting me to moderate this panel today. So I want to take a quick minute to set up sort of 4 things that we want to touch on as we're talking through this panel. And Bruce and Kristy touched on this first one. So the first one is timing. I feel like this gathering is incredibly timely because we're at a moment where action could make a huge difference in our future as a community, as well as in the futures of people who are experiencing homelessness and housing instability in our community. And now, during my tenure at the Corporation for Supportive Housing, I get to do a lot of work in communities across the country, and right now I'm working in a lot of your communities on the West Coast. And I was with a colleague the other day who is one of my partners in this work, and I asked her why she thought her community in particular had been so successful in their endeavors to end homelessness. And the thing that she said that was the most important item was timing. She felt like in her community, they were able to make the good decisions, bold decisions at the right time. And in a lot of communities that are struggling now, what has happened is that they're making the right decisions now and they're being bold now, but really they're 5 years too late. And we want to be sure here in the district that we are, and in the region, that we are not 5 years too late or 3 years too late or even a year too late. We want to be sure that we are making these investments, that we are bringing our partners together in a way that, that puts us ahead of any sort of crisis coming our way rather than behind it. The second thing I want to just touch on and that we are going to specifically get into today is strategic investments. And we're going to talk a little bit about why you all have chosen to make the investments that you've made over time. But I wouldn't be a good CSHer or a good HUD alum if I didn't talk a little bit about investments in affordable housing. We need private sector and philanthropy to not just invest in affordable housing at sort of the higher range of the affordable housing scale, but to invest in the lives of very extremely low income people, families, and individuals who are experiencing homelessness and housing instability so that we can more quickly get folks back into housing. So obviously we need all sorts of affordable housing options, but it is critical, and I can't say this enough, it is critical that as a community we invest in and don't lose sight of units that are at the 0 to 50%, and I would say actually at the 0 to 30% range on the affordable housing scale. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The third thing I want to touch on is racial equity. In my portfolio at CSH and in communities where I get to work, I really have the opportunity to figure out and work with folks around this issue of racial equity and come up with solutions that will work within the homeless services system. And I will say that I learned a lot about racial equity in my career here in the district. I grew up professionally here. I started here when I was 24, and I learned a lot about those dynamics here. So I just want to give you a couple of stats to have in the back of your mind. We know that people of color are overrepresented in the homeless population nationally due to a legacy of discrimination across our systems in the United States. And while African Americans make up 13% of our general population, they make up more than 40% of people experiencing homelessness in this country. In the district, while African Americans make up 47% of our population, they make up 87% of people experiencing homelessness in our community. We cannot ignore this issue. We must lead around this issue. So this is something that communities are grappling with right now, and it's going to require leadership and training and really hard discussions, policy changes, investments towards creating more equitable access, outcomes, and communities across our country. And I think that the corporate sector has a big role to play in that. Just as an example, when we lead conversations in some of these communities, we use the Starbucks video that they created as a result of some of the racial equity problems that they encountered as a way to spur conversation. And then the last thing I want to touch on is voice, because we've talked a lot about investment. Investment is incredibly important, and our corporate sector partners have been and must continue to be investing in our work. But I would argue that their voice is equally as important, and lending their voices to this movement can and will create momentum, sort of more momentum than any of us can individually. Private philanthropy, corporate sector, government, and this is something that Bruce mentioned, government and nonprofits have to work together in order to get the results that we want. So let's talk about all of this stuff. I just laid out a pretty aggressive agenda of questions. I do want to note that there are note cards on your tables. So if you have questions as the panel is talking, please jot them down. Silvana, I think, will be walking around and picking up questions, and we'll leave 15 minutes at the end of our session for questions. So now I want to take a minute to tell you who's up here. We have, starting here, Celeste James, who's the Executive Director of Community Health at Kaiser Permanente of the Mid-Atlantic. Next to her, we have Racquel Russell, the Vice President for Government Relations and Public Affairs at Zillow. Zillow has been a great partner in this work. All of you have been a great partner, but I got to work with Zillow through our work with the White House and the Obama administration. It was super fun. And next up, we have Jim Green, who is the Senior Vice President for Government Affairs and Public Policy at Salesforce. And then last but not least, we have Rekha Grennan, who is the Director of Corporate Affairs and Corporate Social Responsibility Strategy at Cisco. Did I get that right?
You got it all.
All right. So let's go. The first question is really for all of you, just to set the stage. Why did your business get involved in this work? Let's start with you.
Okay. Well, I think that for Zillow, it was an obvious choice. We as a company are about home. We're about helping people find their home, find a home that they love and that they thrive in. And as a company where we've been around for about 13 years, and as a company who puts the consumer as our North Star, and we follow the consumer and make sure that what we're building and doing is about the consumer, we want to make sure it's about all the consumers. We want to make sure that everyone's journey is part of our journey and part of what we're building. So for us, as we built out our social impact and our civic engagement, focusing on housing insecurity and homelessness was just an obvious choice. And when we decided to start our social impact work, we thought, so how can we make a difference? We're a younger company. Our revenue may not be as high as other tech companies. Like, what can we do? And so part of what we focused on is financial resources, but really leaning into the things that we do best. Our data, our research, using our platform. We have a great brand recognition. How do we use our voice to bring awareness to these issues? And so that's why we did it and how we chose to get involved.
Yeah, some of the reports that you've done recently have been incredibly helpful in communities that I've been working in, so
Yeah.
thank you for that. Jim?
Sure, and it's great to be here with you all this morning. Salesforce, adheres to stakeholder theory, right? So what that means is shareholders are a big stakeholder for us, as are employees, our customers, our partners, and the communities in which we operate. And so if we're adhering to stakeholder theory and we are basing our work on our core values, one of those being equality, it's not why are you getting involved, it's why aren't you getting involved. So in San Francisco, you talked about numbers in DC, and I really applaud the approach that you all are taking in DC right now in this issue. But in San Francisco, if you all have been there anytime recently, you cannot walk down the street and not see
That's right.
the homeless population. We're at Salesforce Tower, the largest building on the West Coast at this point. You go down the elevator, you walk outside, and you see someone who's homeless. And what are we doing if we're not doing anything for the least among us? And so it really is, if you're adhering to your value set and stakeholder theory, you can't not be involved. And I like how you set it up at the beginning, which is corporations are asked all the time for financial support, and that's a really key ingredient. But really, it's the voice that you can lend and the leadership that you can provide to any issue that you decide to get involved in. And so we're doing that at a city level in San Francisco. We're beginning to do that with partners like Cisco and Kaiser at a regional level. And then we're also getting really involved now in Sacramento with the new governor and the new administration on the issue of homelessness and tying it into housing as well.
Yeah, I do a lot of work in California, and definitely people know that you all are involved and are doing good work. Celeste?
Sure. To improve the health of an entire community, we must step beyond the four walls of our hospitals and medical centers to help those most in need. We hope this national commitment to impact investing in housing stability will inspire other companies to share the responsibility of this critical issue growing in the United States. Bernard Tyson, CEO of Kaiser Permanente. This is our leadership who inspires us to recognize that as a healthcare organization, as a total health organization, a mission-driven organization that's dedicated to improving the health of our 12 million members across the country and the communities that we serve, that we must step out of the four walls of our medical centers and address social needs. Kaiser Permanente has a vision of creating communities where people who live in them are among the healthiest in the nation. And in order to do that, we have to recognize that as a healthcare organization, we have an obligation, a moral imperative, a business imperative to address the unmet social needs of our members and of our general population. And housing is a big one. Housing is a critical issue, and we recognize that as a healthcare organization, again, physical health is important, mental health, and also social health. So in the past 3 years, we've announced 3 bold agenda items. One is Thriving Cities, which is a focus on policy, which we just talked about, a focus on local networks called Thrive Local, to be able to network and navigate people into social services. And the third one is housing and homelessness, thriving communities. So really and truly, we want people to genuinely thrive in our communities, and housing and homelessness is a big part of that.
Housing and homelessness is so closely tied to health, and this idea of thriving is something that we're grappling with at CSH, and how we can really use supportive housing as not just an intervention type, but as an approach to promote this kind of health and wellness that you're talking about.
That's right.
So we'll dig into that maybe a little bit
Wonderful.
more.
Thank
And
you.
Rekha, last but not least, why did you all get involved in this?
So Cisco is a little bit of the granddad in Silicon Valley, and it's been around for about 30 years, and it's been since day one. Philanthropy has been deeply embedded in the DNA of the company, and it is something that our employees deeply cherish about the company and what we stand for. Over the last 20, 30 years, we've been one of the largest U.S. corporate donors. Not many people may necessarily know that, but largely through the donation of our servers and our products. We've always been the backbone of the internet. So a lot of people's organizations in this room run on what we do. And in 2015, we had a new CEO come in to lead Cisco, and he is a different kind of leader in the sense that he recognizes that what we do in the community gives us a voice, I think, to a point that you made earlier, and we need to use that voice. If we're going to be leaders, leaders need to exercise that voice in a way that benefits all, that we can all thrive in a community. And if we think about employees as one of our leading stakeholders, that's essential for Cisco. It's what helps us to attract and retain talent, and talent wants to live in a community that is thriving. And that is not, unfortunately, what is happening in the Bay Area. We have so much growing inequality that it is really hard to shut your eyes to it, as Jim was talking about. It's right in your front door. It's down the street. It's on your commute. This should not be happening in a society that is as capable and wealthy as ours. And Santa Clara County is one of the wealthiest countries, if not the wealthiest county in the country. And so Chuck was deeply passionate about this issue. He saw what was happening, recognized that Cisco, while our CSR has always led, like many companies, many in the room, with our markets and our business, as we enter new markets, we have gone out and we've worked in those communities. And what he realized was we needed to invest back at home, that this was something that we just really weren't paying enough attention to. So actually, it's a little bit of a personal story for him in the sense that he called Mayor Liccardo, who happened to be a good friend of his before he became mayor, and he said, Sam, I want to do something on this issue. Who do I talk to? He pointed him to Jennifer Loving, who is running Destination Home in Santa Clara County, which is a public-private organization that is bringing together both the county and the city of San Jose and all the other smaller communities within the county to actually address this problem on a systemic systems change level. They did a very well-thought-out, well-planned study to look at the health costs in the community. And, I mean, it was something on order of $500 million a year for the homeless population in particular. So that led to a series of strategies over the course of several years that led them to house 6,000 homeless people within existing affordable housing. That housing stock is no longer available. It's dried up. That's right. And so we need to build more housing. That led to Measure A, which was a $700 million public bond that allowed for the construction of supportive housing, specifically for the ELI community, so they're 0 to 30%.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. 0 to 30%.
So Chuck invited Jen over to dinner. They talked. She presented the plan, and she asked for $1 billion. So
I want to
Go
start
big or
getting
go home.
Go big or go home.
going to dinner with people who I can ask for $1 billion. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
so I mean, and I love this piece of it because it is how we all work, right? It is the challenge. What's a big enough ask? What's the right ask? And Jen went big, and she said, I need $1 billion. We need the private capital to leverage the public funding. The public funding can't move fast enough. And he said, great. I don't know if I can do all that, but I'm going to try. And I'll see, so we ended up doing $50 million. And I think the benefit of that for our company, it's the biggest grant we've ever done. It is a straight out 5-year grant. And we're working across supportive housing, construction, homelessness prevention, and tech. So we're helping them synchronize their HMIS systems with the local community-based organizations and addressing technical issues that come up in synchronizing data and just challenges that come along with just infrastructure. Most of these organizations don't have IT networking professionals working with them. Yeah. So they don't have a help desk. So this is something that this particular grant is looking to help address. So it's usually utilizing our core expertise as well. But beyond that, we've also used that voice to enter into advocacy discussions, which is relatively new for the company. We've also been using that voice to amplify it with our employees, and it's been a fabulous rallying cry for employees. We've actually completely leveraging existing programs with Time to Give and our matching grants program. Our employees have gone out in different cities in the country, specifically through Covenant House, actually, and become Covenant House's through our employee engagement, we've become Covenant House's largest corporate donor. And we're there in 9 cities. We have hundreds of employees. They're signing up to do new activities and raise money for Covenant House. We're here in DC, and so it's been an amazing rallying cry for the company.
Thanks for that. So I want to stick to the topic of voice for a minute, which you definitely touched on. But Jim, this is a question specifically for you. In your case, Salesforce has made both significant investments, but I think you touched on this a little bit. Your CEO is also personally sort of in the forefront on investment and advocacy on this particular issue. And do you see this sort of dual personal corporate commitment as key to the kind of impact that you can have? And what can corporate leaders who are sitting in this room today do as individuals and influencers to engage on this issue?
I think you start with just the leadership. Leadership really matters. CEOs are the leaders of companies, right? Mark founded Salesforce 20 years ago. He's also a 5th generation San Franciscan. When he founded the company 20 years ago, one of the key insights that he made was founding the 1-1-1 model, which was 1% of the company's equity, 1% of the company's product, and 1% of employee time would go back into philanthropy, right? And at the time, we had one product, there was about 5 employees, and there was no valuation, right? So it wasn't that big a deal. But 20 years later, we're 35,000 employees worldwide, and it means through our product that about 35,000 nonprofits run on our technology, right? To your point as well. And, we've given over about $250 million in grants. And so leadership matters. And so it bakes into the culture. So at an individual level, Mark cares. He's a native San Franciscan. He's the CEO. His eyes are open. But really, it's the culture that permeates throughout the entire company. And those 35,000 employees now have 8 days a year, 8 paid days off to go volunteer in whatever issue that is important to them, right? And so we are in a moment in time. I don't want to get too bold here, but I didn't live through the
bold. Let's do it.
I didn't live through. I was born in 1976. I'm a bicentennial baby, so I didn't have that moment. This moment feels like the most important time, certainly in my life, right? I think the next 5 to 10 years are going to have an outstanding impact on the next 50 to 100 years, and you just have to seize the moment, and that, again, is back to leadership. You can't not be involved. You can't not see what's happening out there, right? The economic numbers are fantastic. Unemployment is really low. The Bay Area is this huge economic driver, and yet these inequalities that we see every day are just so stark. I was born in Oakland, California, where Kaiser's from. Bernard Tyson is on the board of Salesforce. He's a great leader in the area as well. If you have pride in where you come from, and if your eyes are open, you have to seize the moment. And whether you're the CEO or whether you're an employee at the company or anywhere, you have to be involved. And you can't just say it's the government's job, or you can't just say it's the nonprofit's job, right? Or you can't just say it's a private sector's job. It's all of our collective efforts that are going to put a dent into these really large issues that we're facing right now.
So I want to switch a little bit and talk about the business case for investment. So again, like folks who are in this audience, obviously, if this is your community, you're going to have a personal connection to what we're talking about, what we're doing. If you walk down the street here, if you walk down the street in LA or San Francisco or San Diego, you can see what's happening, or Seattle. So I want to talk a little bit about the business case, and I want to start with Racquel at Zillow. Zillow has been in the forefront of innovation on this particular issue with your use of data to make the case for investment and policy changes. So can you tell us a little bit more about why you decided to go in that particular direction, and how data plays into what you do?
Sure, and our data and research are one way that we've engaged, but it was the first way that we engaged in this issue. And you have to remember, Zillow was founded about 13 years ago, And so it was right on the cusp and in the midst of the housing crisis. And after a couple years of launching, we were actually having a conversation here in DC with folks, and it was our chief economist, who's now our chief analytics officer at the time. He was in a meeting with some folks at the Treasury and was like, well, you know, we have all this data at Zillow, but obviously you guys have that too. You don't need our data, right? And it's like, again, in the midst of the crisis, and the Treasury official was like, no, give us all your data, right? And there began that partnership that we have now built over the last 10 plus years of us really providing and partnering with policymakers and decision makers around housing issues. And in the beginning, it was around, you know, obviously negative equity and homes that were underwater and things that were happening in that arena. But in the last 5 or 6 years, we've really focused on housing affordability. Yeah. We saw the crisis coming. We were behind. The housing crisis was behind us, but folks were still focusing on, as they should have been, on that. But we were seeing, our economists were seeing that rents were just rising and was an output of that housing crisis. And so our economists, our economic research team at Zillow, which kind of operates like a mini think tank inside of Zillow, kept talking about this rental affordability crisis, talking to policymakers, sharing the data and the research. And one of the things in the last couple of years that we heard were questions around, well, do you have any data and research around homelessness? Yeah, what's happening there? And because we have been really focused on just rental affordability and housing affordability. So in 2017, we were able to do some groundbreaking research, really showing the correlation between rising rents and the increase to the homeless population. I think that's why this was so important at that time, is that as policymakers and elected officials were starting to talk about homelessness, the public had misconceived perceptions on, why people were homeless, right? Yes, and so really being able to make that correlation, that link back to rental affordability, rising rents. Bruce talked about this in his intro, that, there's a lot of people who are homeless who are employed, right? There are a lot of people who are homeless that you don't realize they're homeless, their kids are going to school, they're still living their lives. And so being able to really put a face to that and use our platform to do that was important to us. And so we were able to do that research in 2017. We were able to follow up on that research end of last year, to, really now, the first set of research was around just rising rents and the correlation, but this new research really started talking about the people themselves and really talking about those communities where people have spent more than 30% of their income on rent, and the correlation to the rapid increase of homelessness that happens in those communities versus communities where they're spending under 30%, and being able to show that correlation as well. So taking it just from this abstract about rising rents and really about what's happening in communities, especially communities where they're spending more of their income on rent. But also in that research, we were able to show that, quite frankly, we're undercounting, and I think we all intuitively know this, undercounting the homeless population. Our research shows that we're probably undercounting it by about 20%, right? So being able to provide that research and give policymakers the tools they need to make the policy decisions they need to make, has been a natural place for us to start as we started this work. The last thing I'll mention around our data and research is Zillow is headquartered in Seattle. So we're one of the tech companies that aren't in the Bay Area, but Seattle has a thriving tech industry as well. And there's another company located in the Seattle area, you may have heard of it, Microsoft, who has recently made an announcement of $500 million to affordable housing in the Seattle region. And when they were working on that project, and well before they made the announcement, they came to us and said, can you provide us the data and research in order to make sure that we're investing this $500 million in the right places and in the right communities? And we were able to partner with them on that. So we take our partnerships seriously, both at the government level, but also with our peers who are looking to do great work on our communities as well.
Yeah, Seattle has a great tech scene. You don't have to.
I think so. I think so too, Jim. I think so too. We get, we're like the redheaded stepchild. So, it's like, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, but we do have a thriving tech scene. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, just a couple of big companies up there
in
Seattle.
Just a couple.
And I would just note to the folks in the room, Racquel said it was groundbreaking
research. It was groundbreaking research. It was the information that they were able to provide to the field for use at the local level and at the national level was incredibly valuable to policymakers across the nation. So thank you for that work. Celeste, let's talk a little bit about how healthcare providers are thinking about these issues as they relate to your core business. Again, sort of what's the business case for being involved? I know you guys have a pretty big portfolio in this area as well.
We do. So, so there was a HUD study in 2018 that indicated that homeless individuals, because of their lack of basic resources and their lack of supportive networks, are 5 times more likely to utilize hospital services, to be admitted to the hospital. And these individuals often stay 4+ days in the hospital at $2,000 to $4,000 per day. So there's a huge cost implication to homelessness related to overutilization of hospital care, for one. Secondly, people who are homeless are more likely to suffer from chronic conditions, undiagnosed chronic conditions as well as untreated chronic conditions, from diabetes to heart disease to you name it. The other reality is that people who are homeless, of course, are often victims of violence, so their personal safety is at risk. People who are homeless often suffer mental illness, from depression to anxiety. Sometimes it's because of being homeless. Sometimes it is what led to homelessness. People who are homeless are also subject to not being able to take their meds, to be able to, comply with their medical instructions. I was at a talk recently where a Kaiser Permanente doctor asked, with a show of hands, and I won't make you guys answer this, she said, how many of you in this room have had to prepare for a colonoscopy? And anybody who's over 50, hopefully, has had to do this. And the harrowing 24 hours before your colonoscopy, right? As you flush yourself.
I knew we were going to talk about colonoscopies today.
But we are.
But the reality is, if you're homeless, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Right? So there are major, major concerns about the health and well-being of people who are homeless. So there are cost concerns, as I said. When you have people who are overstaying in your hospital, as we've had before, because they have nowhere to go, they don't have, a home to go to, that's a huge cost for the health system, not just for our health system, but for the health system writ large, right? And so we have to address this. We have to address homelessness for business reasons, and as I said before, because morally, it's necessary. We too, you've heard reference to California multiple times. Kaiser Permanente is headquartered in California, and as we walk around our building near Lake Merritt, if anyone's been in the Bay Area, we could see at every turn homeless people. And so it is very difficult for us to ignore this reality, again, as a healthcare organization, and keep on stepping. So when we think about homelessness and affordable housing, I want to just call out something else that I think is important to mention, is that it is not enough for us to simply, well, 2 things I'll mention. It's not enough for us to simply create more housing units and expect to move people into into housing. We have to recognize that if people are homeless, very often there are all kinds of other conditions that we have to deal with. And so we have to provide supportive services, ideally close to where they're living. So supportive housing is really focused on that, and that's what we're focused on as well, is making sure that there's medical care, that there's food, that there's job training, and all kinds of wraparound, what we call wraparound services, to support people to be able to move securely out of their homeless state and into stability. The second thing I would say is that we cannot think only about homelessness as a solution. So in addition to thinking about supportive housing, we also have to consider other ways that we can invest, and Kaiser Permanente is thinking about this, in things like job training, in quality education, because we know education is linked to health and health is linked to housing and so forth. So there are these linkages that we also have to be investing in. So while we talk today about investing in housing, affordable housing, and reducing homelessness, we also just really have to consider the interconnectedness of what we call social determinants of health. So I wanted to leave you all with that. We've got, I don't know if I'll get a chance to talk about some of the specific, I don't know if you want me to talk about some of the specific things that we're doing, but I will mention a few. You mentioned Enterprise, who's in the room. Last May, Kaiser Permanente announced a $200 million investment nationally in housing, and that is something that we're calling the Thriving Communities Fund. And that fund is going to directly to a homelessness project in Oakland, California. But also we have since set up with Enterprise Community Fund, with a fund with Enterprise Communities, we've set up the RX, or the Prescription Home Fund. And that's a fund where we put $50 million, and it was matched then by Enterprise Communities Fund, to be able to provide low-interest loans in the DC metro area and other Kaiser Permanente communities. That fund has to be used to address the needs of low-income individuals, and it has to be used in Kaiser Permanente communities, and we're in 8 regions across the country. We are also participating in something called Accelerating Investments in Healthy Communities, and we're one of 6 health systems that have been selected to anchor development teams to focus on homelessness across the country. Here we're focusing on it in the Purple Line Corridor, which runs from Prince George's County to Montgomery County. I'm assuming most of us are local here, but it runs along a fairly long route in our metro area, where, as you know, when a metro comes in, there are huge chances of gentrification, of moving people out or displacing people, and we want to avoid that. So we're investing in housing and homelessness there. Last, I will mention the partnership that we have with Community Solutions. They have a project called Built for Zero, which is really designed to end chronic homelessness in cities such as DC, Baltimore, Montgomery County, and Arlington County, so counties and cities. And they really rely on data and community outreach, and are doing great work to bring those numbers down to 0. And I will mention that Bruce talked about the challenge, the $1 billion challenge of the Housing Leaders Group. Kaiser Permanente is very pleased to be part of that $1 billion challenge, and we're hoping that as a healthcare organization, people will see this kind of unexpected nature of healthcare in this arena, and will join us and help to bring $1 billion or more to this region over the next couple of years.
That's amazing. We love those community solutions, folks. Thank you for partnering with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to sort of wrap up this part of the discussion. Rekha, you mentioned Destination Home a little bit, but can you talk a little bit about why Cisco chose to invest in systems change versus funding to nonprofits to provide direct service?
Well, you mentioned the affordable housing crisis, which is very acute in the Bay Area. And there is a lot of energy and momentum around addressing the affordable housing crisis. And what we have seen through our partners in this education process that we've been on over the last 2 years, but it's just, again, it goes back to voice. You know, this community does not have a voice. And so we recently had the MTA had a community sort of forum called CASA, where they actually, undertook a study of what was happening in the region. And one of the challenges of the Bay Area is you have all these small jurisdictions. You have some major cities, Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, but then there's these tiny little jurisdictions that have control over their zoning laws and their all of the essential pieces that go into where you can build and how you can build. And one of the things that even in the summary of this report, they said, we just didn't effectively address homelessness, and because it didn't come out in the community forums. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Jen talks about quite frequently, she's our in-house guru now, essentially, she seems like part of the team, but it's that you need the political will, the community will, and the money. And you all know this, But it's particularly acute in the Bay Area. We have very vocal community forums. And Destination Home just really brings together everything in Santa Clara County that's essential to addressing these issues on a systems level change. You can put somebody in a house, but you can't necessarily make sure that they can then afford to stay in that house, or that they have access to the health services, or are they going to get employment. It needs to be a whole wraparound system. And so Destination Home saw that, had the connections and relationships with the local community-based partners. They also had the relationship not only with the city of San Jose, but also the county, and they didn't always necessarily see eye to eye. So having all of those stakeholders at the table in one organization with the same goal, the same strategic plan, the same intent to execute was just absolutely essential for the progress that they've seen. So it was a no-brainer for us. And those community-based organizations are still part of the work that we do. We just had several dozens of employees in this one particular, because that was all they could take, help move new residents into a new supportive housing unit. Cisco donated, through our relationship with Destination Home, donated the furniture because they couldn't get their orders in time and they couldn't get the public money moving fast enough. It's a big mix, and there's a lot of stakeholders at the table. There's a number of other corporations that are part of this as well. But all of that coming together, and that ability for Destination Home to leverage different assets and resources at different times is really essential. And in that affordable housing discussion, I think there's a lot of companies that and other interests that one, there's a natural market for affordable housing. So the market forces will lean in towards impact investing dollars. They will lean in towards low interest loans, and they will get affordable housing or even luxury housing built. Is it the right thing to support the market? I'm not an expert in that, but what I do know is that the market forces don't exist for ELI.
That's right.
And that is what Destination Home stands for. It's what they're about. It's about giving voice to the voiceless and serving as their advocate, so that when we're having these policy discussions on a regional basis, that we're talking about what really needs to happen for ELI. And the numbers are startling, just absolutely startling to me. Out of 660 some odd thousand housing units in Santa Clara County, 354 are for ELI. So when you look at the housing stock that's been built in the Bay Area, those numbers are just ridiculous. They just don't make any sense. And in the last 2 years, where, again, Santa Clara County has been very successful in moving 6,000 people into shelter and into supportive housing, there's still 7,500 people as of 2018. Well, actually, 2017. As of 2019, there's over 9,000. We went up 30%.
Yeah.
And that's because of the lack of the safety net. We know that most of a third of the population is below median income. We know that they spend 62% of their income on housing. In that environment, there's so many different components that need to change. You need to be able to start somewhere, but you also need to make sure that you're stemming the tide.
Yeah. I think that's a really nice segue into sort of my next question. You mentioned ELI, or extremely low income people, and sort of how the market doesn't really exist for them. And you are all from the West Coast, and there's a reason, I imagine, that we have a panel of people from the West Coast here, right? And you also mentioned this sort of double-digit increases. The 2019 point-in-time count numbers from across the country have not been released by HUD yet, but they are being released community by community around the country. And what we're seeing on the West Coast is largely these double-digit increases that are incredibly alarming. So for this audience, how do you think that we can create urgency? I started this conversation, and Bruce and Kristy talked about this idea of timing and urgency. How can we create urgency in DC so that we can prevent that sort of same dynamic that's happening on the West Coast here in the district? And Jim, I'll start with you. Is that an easy question for you?
Well, human nature is tough sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't see it, It's hard to create that sense of urgency, so I'll start by saying it's difficult, but you do need to plan, right? And I'll go back to something I said earlier, and I think we've all touched on, is it's leadership. So I would say that if the business community in this region made it a priority and locked arms together and provided a voice to this issue, then I think that would move the dial, right? I think that would then in turn get the attention of the elected officials, right?
Yep.
They're an important stakeholder. It would also get the attention of the citizens and the constituents in these markets who probably don't think that the business community does care all that much, right? So you're kind of throwing them for a loop. If you have CEOs standing up together and saying this is a priority, we need to think of it as an urgent need, and we're doing our part, right? And so then you come out with what Cisco's doing, what Salesforce is doing, Zillow, Kaiser, and on, and then it becomes multiplication and instead of just 1 + 1. And so I think really showing that leadership is crucial to creating that sense of urgency.
So I think what I hear you saying is that today's event and the partnership that we're creating here is an awesome step in the right direction in order to get there. Anyone else want to jump into this part of the conversation?
I think, one of the things that we've done at Zillow, about 4 years ago, we had a roundtable of Denver, Seattle, Portland, I'm forgetting a city, but really kind of to looking at the Bay Area and seeing that we were all on that trajectory from a rental affordability perspective to what the Bay Area was feeling and experiencing, and how do we prevent it? And we brought together policymakers, civic and community leaders to have that conversation amongst the 3 to 4 markets where the data was clear, that was the path we were going down. And so I think that for us at the time it was, we know we're not there yet. We're not in the same rental affordability crisis as California, many markets in California, but we're heading there. How do we prevent it? I think if DC can do the same thing, right? Looking at all the numbers show that we are going into that space where San Francisco, LA, Seattle are, how do we prevent that? To be able to show what's ahead of you and really paint that picture, I think is going to be important.
Yeah.
If I can jump in on the
Yeah,
business,
please.
you mentioned the business case before. I mean, I think because Cisco is sort of the everyman's company in the sense that we followed a very traditional best practice CSR evolution. We went with our markets and we went where our stakeholders were, which is still a very big piece of CSR strategy. But what our CEO brought to the table was this little bit of a left turn, right? It was seeing what was coming up the pike and then being able to say, you know what, this does tie into what we do. Cisco's been, and that was where, we've been doing a lot of work over many years in workforce development. And we've had the Networking Academy, which has trained well over 2 million people over time with Cisco certified networking certificates, basic IT skills around the world, and then helped create a bridge into positions with our partner community. So we've been doing that for a long time, but then what we also realized was there's this gap. So we undertook a study last year called the Digital Readiness Index, and we're actually just getting ready to release new data this summer. But if you take a look at all of the human development indicators across just economies, and you look at success factors and where they're going and what their trajectory is, there's this basic human services element that if you don't have access to food, you don't have access to shelter, you cannot, and then there's the next piece is health, right? You cannot get onto those stepping stones to get into quality education. You cannot feasibly study and get yourself into a paying job. So when we're thinking about inequality, these basic critical human needs are just, they're a no-brainer. And so we're looking at, through the Digital Readiness Index as we go into different states and look at the data on a state-by-state basis as we look at different countries. We actually just launched data in Australia last summer. And shelter was a big piece of this. So that to us, it's this link to the business strategy, right? It's this link to corporate social responsibility. And Chuck has talked about this quite frequently over the last couple of years. It's that businesses may not see that direct line now, but it's there. It is there. The trajectory that we're going on in terms of income inequality, not only in this country, but around the world, it's it's going to determine where we are in the next 50 to 100 years. We have a lot of serious issues that are coming up the pike that we just need to really start thinking about in a foundational level, because otherwise, if we're not thinking about this in a systems way, we're going to get in a place where we are going to have a really hard time digging ourselves out.
Yeah, you keep giving me really nice segues. Can you talk a little bit about urgency in the work that you're
Absolutely.
doing? Because she mentioned sort of this healthcare and human services. Feels like it rolls right into the work that you're doing.
Yes, it does. So I'll start by saying that when I talked about the connection between homelessness and health, health and health care is everybody's business. And as corporations, small businesses, any kind of business, affordability of health care is huge. It's really big because we pay for that as businesses, right? We pay to cover our employees. And so when we are dealing with a sick population, a population that is avoidably sick, I should say, that is overutilizing the healthcare system, it's affecting healthcare costs, and that's affecting business. So that's, I think, an extremely urgent matter for businesses. The other thing is low productivity. When we're not meeting people's social needs, we're not meeting their, fully meeting their health needs, it results in people who are absent from work. It results in people who are just simply not as productive at work, and those are also business concerns. So I think when you frame it as a drain on business, homelessness, and the lack of social care, I think it becomes a much more urgent issue. In just last week, Kaiser, just this week actually, Kaiser Permanente, Bernard Tyson was here in this region to announce a program that we have called Thrive Local. And I mentioned this before, but this is a network that is designed to help to bring social service providers together so that healthcare institutions, not only Kaiser Permanente, can refer members for various areas of social care, to meet hunger needs, to meet housing needs, to job training needs, and so forth. And so, again, businesses have to recognize that housing and homelessness doesn't operate in isolation, and that healthcare has to be pushed to do more. You might not know that healthcare, that nonprofit hospitals are required through the ACA, through the Affordable Care Act, to invest 3% of our revenue in community benefit. And hospitals have typically done that by providing free health care. Kaiser Permanente does that as well. But we're asking healthcare to go even beyond that and invest in other ways, such as through housing and into housing and homelessness, and to even look at not only their philanthropic dollars, but their dollars in their treasury, their social impact dollars. And that's what Kaiser Permanente is doing, is going beyond the 3% that we give in grants, because grants alone can't do it, and investing outside in other assets within our organization. So I guess I leave you with push healthcare to do more. That 3% is really critical, and we want to make sure that it's used well, and then recognize that in business, homelessness is a problem that we all suffer from, that we all pay for.
Yeah. So I want to remind folks that there are cards at your table if you have questions for the panel. And as we're preparing those questions and getting ready to move into the Q&A part, I just want to ask one last question of everybody up on the stage with me. And that is, what do you think are the most important, I put out some sobering statistics around inequities at the beginning of this discussion. And what do you think are the most important public policies that can help us to reduce inequities and create more inclusive communities from your vantage point? I won't pick on, it's a tough question. I won't pick on any one of you, see if any of you have a thought around access or performance or how we do community differently.
I'll start.
Yeah, great.
I think, look at fundamentals, right? So we've talked a lot about housing. So right now, I think in California, everyone should be in Sacramento demanding that legislators fix our housing crisis, right? And that will require changing zoning laws, allowing for more building, not allowing political forces that say not in my backyard to win. So we need to get housing right, and we don't have it right in California right now. I think we also need to look at another fundamental is just our education system, right? So our public education across the country, and certainly in California, and certainly in my hometown of Oakland, inequities are stark, right? Depending on what zip code you grow up in, you have totally different education outcomes, and has nothing to do with the person, it has to do with the system. And so are we as a corporate actor paying enough attention to education policy? I would probably say no at this point. So we need to look at that, and then we need to look at revenue within government at all facets. Those would be a couple of sort of fundamentals that I would look at.
Yeah, that feels right to me.
Well, I think that this is more kind of tagging on to what Jim said, more foundational, so not like specific policy, but I think that as our policymakers are having these conversations and there's a dialogue and a public discourse, we've got to be clear and direct and open about the inequities and where they really are, right? That they're happening in communities of color, that they're happening in low-income communities, and that's not always talked about directly and openly. And I think that if we want policies to address inequities, then we have to be able to speak about the inequities. And there's a role for the corporate sector to play in that. Jim talked about, your community really, as a child, your zip code being a determinant factor in your trajectory in life. One of the partnerships that we have at Zillow right now is with the Seattle Housing Authority. The Seattle Housing Authority has a pilot program called Creating Moves to Opportunities. That's based on Raj Chetty's work from a few years ago, well, it's over 20 years, but Raj Chetty's work that really showed that, that correlation of a child that grew up in a lower opportunity neighborhood and their economic trajectory being so vastly different and their ability to move up the economic ladder than children who grew up in higher opportunity neighborhoods. So the Seattle Housing Authority is doing with this pilot program is they are providing families with housing vouchers, increased funding, to be able to move into those more higher opportunity neighborhoods. As you can imagine, housing units in those higher opportunity neighborhoods are hard to come by, so the Seattle Housing Authority has been working to try to connect their families to landlords and property managers. Zillow has a unique role in the fact that we have partnerships and business relationships with those property managers and landlords. So we are now serving as kind of a connector, really helping with the outreach, getting those landlords and property managers in those higher opportunity neighborhoods through marketing and targeted outreach to really lease up to these families and showing them the correlation, showing them the reason, the business case of why they should get involved in this program. And those are kind of the things that we can do to try to really address those inequities. I think that the Creating Move to Opportunities pilot program, which is also doubling as a research project that Raj Chetty is still involved in, is going to show the importance of this work and what we need to be doing with programs like our Housing Choice Voucher Program. So hopefully those kind of things where we can show the data and research and show the outcomes and the changes to our families and to our children will be helpful in that work as well.
Yeah, for sure. So what I'm hearing from this panel up here is there's a bunch of roles to choose from for people who are in this room in terms of how you get involved. So you could choose one or more. And certainly we're talking about investment. Everybody here is doing investment of like cash dollars in different ways to promote this work and help us move the needle on homelessness. The second is voice and leading, especially around, I think that this point that you made around equity and being able to be the voice to have tough conversations. Yeah. It is really hard, I will tell you, in the community certainly that I'm working in, it is really hard to have tough conversations about race and inequities because everybody has experienced them in different ways, and to bring everybody together to try and come up with strategies that will work in any given community. They're just tough conversations. So being a leader in that area, using your voice on the issue of equity, but also on all of these other things that we talked about. I also heard across the board being a convener, using your status as a company in your community to convene the right set of people. there's nobody that I know that I could sit at dinner with and ask for $1 billion. Like, it just, I'm a homeless services provider. I can't do that. But I think it's really amazing that people who are CEOs of companies can bring people together to really have these kinds of conversations. And then the last thing that I heard all of you talk about is being a connector of the dots, connecting the data to the people, to the work that you're doing, to your employees, to government and nonprofit partners within the community. That is another way that folks in this room, did I hit most of the highlights there?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to move on to our Q&A period, and I have a bunch of questions here, so I'm just gonna start. The first question is really about affordability and long-term affordability. So, how can the district ensure that the supportive housing that's created through this partnership and other means has long-term affordability rather than short-term, like 15 years or less? The relentless pressure on affordability, as Bruce mentioned when in the introduction, will only continue and grow. You have thoughts on how we might be able to create long-term sustainability for this work? How can the corporate sector help us do that?
I mean, I think there's a couple of ways that the corporate sector can engage in that kind of work. I mean, I think one is using our platform to raise that awareness and to talk about those issues. I think that when we talk about housing affordability and that kind of long-term housing affordability, we have to go back and talk to them. I don't remember if it was Rekha or Jim that mentioned this, to talk about education, talk about job training, workforce training, and how do we make sure that we're bridging the opportunity gap that exists amongst a lot of the underserved youth. I mean, we work at major tech companies, and we are in a market where a lot of times there are a lot of young people that are in our backyards who don't look at us as places that they could end up at, right? And that doesn't mean they have to have a tech job. I mean, none of us have a tech job, and we work at tech companies, right? There are lots of jobs at these companies, and, but there are a lot of jobs at tech companies, and you can't dream what you can't see, right? So
right.
how do we make sure that as companies we are reaching out to the communities that we live in to help bridge that opportunity gap? I think is an important piece of that long-term housing affordability. So that's something that we at Zillow are starting to focus on and starting to work with nonprofit and educational partners in the Seattle area to really make sure that we are reaching out to our youth in authentic and real ways.
And I just want to add quickly that, and I'm not going to fully answer this question because I also have this question, the same question, is I think there's needs to be greater awareness that when we talk about affordable housing, very often we are or preserving a certain number of units for affordability. There is usually a term limit to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we need to understand that typically when we're talking to developers about affordable housing units, we're talking about a 10 to 15 year span. So I think that we need to push for better than that, that there needs to be permanent, I don't know if it's policies that would create that, but that there's permanent affordable housing, that it's not just 50 units for 15 years. That's not enough. That time goes by really quickly. So I don't know.
But I think that in particular, Kaiser has a role to play. It's not, it's affordability, but it's also sustainability over time. And there's a service component to, especially on the supportive housing side. And how can you help address that piece as well?
The supportive piece? Well, I mean, I think to what has already been said on the panel is that when we are investing in housing, that we're not simply investing in housing, but we're investing in the wraparounds, and that those come with the housing units. And some of that is policy, inclusionary zoning and so forth, that enables us to build housing units where there are other supportive structures around it, as I mentioned before, such as grocery stores and health care, medical services and so forth. So absolutely, to create long-term affordability and support for people, we have to be able to invest in that way. The other thing is we mentioned about economics. We talked about how not everybody who's homeless is without a job. It's that they're not being paid well, and so there has to be more and greater policy around fairness of wages, that when we're paying individuals to work, that we're paying them also to live and to sustain themselves and their families. So I think that's also a big part of creating that long-term support for stable housing.
Yeah, I think that that's a
Yeah.
really important point.
I
Anybody
might
wanna expand on
also
that?
just add there, I mean, I'm not a policy expert, and I don't do policy within the company per se, but I think the realization for a lot of the companies in the Bay Area is just that the challenges that we're facing in terms of growing our workforces, the enormous growth in our businesses, right? We need the talent. And the talent wants to live, we need the talent also to be local. But if they have 2-hour commutes, each way, that's not sustainable. If their teachers can't afford to live in their children's school districts and they're commuting 3 hours each way and they can't afford to be with their children, I mean, these are large systemic societal challenges. And so that, and when we come into communities, I think as companies, we need to be good partners. We need to think about our communities on a holistic level. And not just because our employees are key stakeholders, not just because we're trying to attract talent, but because without that, our employees just simply won't thrive and our business won't thrive. Our industry, from a tech perspective, is based on innovation, and that means having the smartest, strongest workforce. AI, as we develop it going forward, is dependent upon diversity. We need that diversity in those communities working on AI now to shape what our future looks like. So that is, just in terms of our businesses, those are our responsibilities.
Absolutely.
And so this is, we tend to think on short-term cycles because that's our annual reporting and our quarterly reporting, but there is that longer-term component that is equally, and maybe perhaps more so, essential.
So I love that you brought that up because we haven't talked about workforce housing, and as we're talking to the business community here, that's important, is that having housing near where people live is a draw for a talented workforce, and it really supports your workforce. So as business leaders, another reason to think about investing in housing is that you can invest for the sake of your own workforce in ways that are extremely meaningful and extremely income supporting for them to be able to live in their neighborhood, live exactly where they're working. So workforce housing is another term I'll throw out there for business leaders to inquire more about.
So I want to talk a little bit about peer pressure in the most positive way possible. And this question is, have leaders of your companies asked other corporate leaders to invest in affordable housing? And if so, what message worked?
Hey, Jen, do you want to start?
Not really, but I mean, peer pressure is an important component, but everyone has to come to their own decisions when they're ready. Whether that requires a gentle nudge or a hard nudge, to get them there, so be it sometimes. But, I think that the tech industry specifically, there's a bit of a trust gap with our industry and with citizens and government right now. And you kind of need to be a credible corporate actor now more than ever. So there's moral reasons for that, and there's strategic reasons for that too. I mean, you just have to be seen as being part of the fabric of the communities in which you operate. And so I think that more and more corporate leaders are beginning to understand that. B of A is a great example of a corporate actor that is doing great things in the community. It kind of is a no-brainer. And so I'm not sure that peer pressure is going to be required for that much longer versus the pressure from the outside coming in. It's not going to require a CEO call to another CEO necessarily.
Yeah.
And I think the peer pressure can also be not just the a leader proactively pressuring one of their peers, but also just when you see your peers stepping out and doing amazing work, and you're not part of that. There's a little bit of guilt and I should be doing that too, right? So I think that there's something there for when companies do step out and do engage, that other companies tend to follow suit, especially if it's a company or a leader that is well respected. Other companies tend to follow suit of that.
Yeah.
I would also add just, leading by example. I mean, I think, is one. The fact that we went out big, and Chuck has been so vocal on this, not only just galvanized external leaders to kind of engage in that dialogue, but then also our employees, our senior executives have gotten behind this. Our diversity and inclusion officer actually funded a third-party vendor to help Destination Home and its partner agencies look at racial equity within the supportive housing structures and what they're doing in their communities and looking at affordable housing. So they've been doing trainings over the last year, and so there's a report that they'll be releasing on that. But those kinds of things have inspired many other actions that then again will inspire more. Like I said, we've now become the largest corporate donor to Covenant House because of our matching gifts.
Right.
That's entirely employee driven. We have an executive sponsor. Our general counsel is the executive sponsor for that relationship now. But we're seeing that across the Bay Area community. But I think the data and the impact and showing how we have a successful working model, that this can really change the community, is essential. And so it's, the data that Zillow is providing is amazing because there is such a lack of data that really helps point to solutions or the real challenges and the magnitude of them. And then I think, but being able to lead with that. And then the final piece is, we've been pointing a lot to the Edelman Trust Barometer data, and there is a very specific call to action in terms of the public on where they see corporate leaders. Yeah. Corporate leaders are expected now to lend their voice.
Absolutely.
That is like a job requirement now.
Yeah.
And and I also just recently saw some California specific data where our trust is dropping in corporate leaders because of just the enormous challenges that are there. So there are these waves that are happening. We're seeing them across a number of different issues, but it's time for us to be eyes wide open and engage.
Absolutely. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is lead by example, but also a little healthy competition is okay.
Never hurts. I mean, CEOs are competitive people by nature, so yeah.
I think the bottom line is whatever works.
Yeah.
Whatever works.
Yeah.
So this next question is really about political voice. And it says, this panel represents the country's biggest and fastest growing industry. You have a political voice that the people in these communities don't. Can you talk a little bit about what your organizations are doing to put housing affordability on the national agenda?
So I'll start. So for us, yes, we do our data and research, but then we take that data and research and we humanize it. Zillow is a brand that consumers go to for home, and so it's a natural inclination. So like when consumers are on our social platforms, they're looking at beautiful photos of home, but they also get videos of racial disparities that are happening in America around housing. They get videos around that we have produced at Zillow based on our data around homelessness and the homelessness issues that are happening across the country in specific populations, but also generally. So we feel that when we use our platform to really raise awareness, not just for policymakers. I've talked a lot about today our relationship with policymakers and elected officials in our research, but we also then take that, humanize it, tell a story that can resonate with the average consumer, the constituent, the voter, right? So that we are galvanizing those and quite frankly giving the political cover to the policymakers and elected officials around those issues. So we have determined that that is our best use of trying to really move the needle from a political change perspective is by using our brand and our platform based in our research to tell really moving stories.
Yeah, that's great.
So, at Kaiser Permanente, we've partnered with the de Beaumont Foundation on an initiative called City Health that is really designed to target 9 key policy platforms or 9 policy levers that support not just homelessness, but support healthy living, healthy lifestyles. And there's a meddling component to it, which honors cities that achieve a certain goal related to one of the 9 policies. And the policies range from livable wage jobs to inclusionary zoning. I mentioned that before. So there are 9 different policies that have been identified as ones that can move the needle on health and well-being, that are bipartisan and that cities generally can engage in. And so we're very visible with that partnership. And we are working with cities like Washington, D.C. to, again, move the needle on some key areas. Maternal and child health is one of those as well. So I just wanted to mention that, that it's important, I agree with my co-panelists here, for us to be visible and vocal on the policy front. Kaiser Permanente is really just entering the affordable housing arena within the last year, so I can't say what's to come. I mean, I can only expect that we're going to continue to be more and more visible on this, but so far we're just trying to be visible in talking about why we are doing this and what's possible for health systems to do.
I will say, Kaiser funded a study, a really critical study with the Bay Area Council that was just released a couple of months ago, and that was, I think, a fabulous contribution.
Yep. And sorry, one other thing about that. We did just do a study, too, of about 1,000 individuals asking about social needs and how a healthcare organization can meet unmet social needs. And 98% of people who responded to that survey said that healthcare should be screening for social needs at every doctor's visit. And that's another way that we're trying to push the envelope and say healthcare can be doing more.
Outstanding.
Yep.
So as we wrap up, I'm going to ask you all to do a very quick couple sentence last piece of advice for the leaders who are in this audience, for the philanthropic and corporate leaders in this audience, from your experience. And Rekha, I'll start with you.
Oh, goodness. I would say, you know, just to get in there, learn about the issues, create opportunities for your executives to engage in the issue. Many of our partners from Santa Clara County have been coming in and speaking to different teams in Cisco, locally in San Jose, out of curiosity. Our executive team is talking about this every all-hands meeting. We're talking about it at Cisco Live, which is our big partner meeting. Everybody knows Apple's meetings, but but we have one too. And
There's that competition.
No, well, Apple's a great partner of ours, actually. So no competition there. But it's a venue that maybe not the outside world knows about, but it is a huge convening for us, where all of our partners are there, our business partners, our key customers, analysts. You know, there was a big story from an analyst that came out of the last Cisco Live, where we were talking about our commitment to homelessness. So, but we deploy every opportunity and venue that we have available to us because the people who are leading those discussions are passionate about them. Our executive sponsors for big customers and clients are talking about what Cisco's engaged in and what we feel is important. So just get in there, no matter how small it is, but do something that has an impact, work with quality partners, and engage your communities. And I think that's the number one thing when we talk about community well in the Bay Area. Our employees are the community.
Yeah.
And
That's a great point.
We need them at the town hall meetings talking about why a supportive housing development in their neighborhood is really important. I mean, I actually live in New York City, so I used to live in DC, but now I live in New York City. And there's supportive housing and homeless shelters integrated. I live next door to one. I share an alley with a supportive housing building, and it's just part of our community. It's part of what makes New York, amazing. And I think we need to, kind of demonstrate by doing and show that way, but then also, and I think we can do that on an individual level, we can do it on an organizational level, and we can do it on a community level.
Great. We have just a couple minutes left. I know we're running a little long. Jim?
Sure, I'll be quick, because I also don't want to, I'm not aware of what all the companies in the room are already doing, so I'm sure you already are doing much. If I'll offer myself and maybe the other panelists as to being a resource, if you have questions or you're running into trouble, oftentimes internally to get alignment, that can be difficult inside a corporation. Mm-hmm. So I would also echo that just get going and just pick one or two issues, focus on them, create that internal alignment, and great things can happen.
Absolutely.
Great,
The
thanks.
one thing I'll mention for the corporate leaders in the room is to bring a sense of humility to this work. The nonprofit partners, they're on the ground doing this work. They are the experts, and we're there to really be a resource. And so to bring that sense of humility to the work, I think is really important.
Great, thank you. And
And I'll-
Celeste, let's wrap it up.
Thank you. I'll wrap it up and just say, take baby steps. There's a historical context to this. Understand the history. Know how we got here. The policies that were institutionalized that got us here, understand that, and know that it's not going to be easy getting out of it. So take baby steps and just be patient.
Let's do a round of applause for our incredible panel. Thank you.
My name's Tonia Wellons. I am Vice President of Community Investment at the Greater Washington Community Foundation. Please join me again in giving this amazing panel another round of applause. And we're incredibly fortunate to have had Oliva as our moderator. She brings so much depth and knowledge and was able to weave the panel together very nicely. Let's give her a round of applause. So we're near the close of our program, and I'd like to just very, very quickly introduce a young woman who will actually introduce herself, Rashema Melson. Rashema is a recent graduate of Georgetown University. You all may have seen her on the news recently. Let's invite Rashema up to the stage. She will introduce our mayor. Rashema.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here. I'm a recent graduate of Georgetown University, but that isn't how I always envisioned my life. And I don't know how many of you can attest to actually experiencing homelessness, but I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, Southeast, and my family was homeless, and we grew up, and we lived in the D.C. General Shelter. And what I want to say is that it's important for people to know that homelessness isn't just about finding stability. Homelessness is about conforming a lifestyle, and it alters who you are and who you think you want to be. And the most important part of it is the mental health and the well-being of the person. And most of my life, struggling with my family before even being in the DC General Shelter, we lived in like abandoned homes, and we lived on the street, and we lived from couch to couch, and my mom tried to scoundrel up as much money as possible for us to stay in hotels. And you have to think about the fact that some of these children who are facing homelessness do things to they have to step into adult roles and take on that responsibility. There are people who I know, who I went to school with, who I lived in the shelter with. Children is at the age of 13 through 18, prostituting, selling drugs, raising crime rates. And it's not because it's something that, hey, this is what we like to indulge in. It's the point of trying to survive when we don't have any other options. And so I want you guys to see me today as saying that for the resources that I've received from my city and from the help of my mayor, that when you invest in us and you invest in one of the biggest health disparities in the country, that you're helping to change someone's life. You're helping to conform somebody's mind to know that they are somebody, that, you know, they're worth something. Sometimes we're seen as subhuman. Sometimes we're not valued. Sometimes we mean nothing to people. And this is the mentality that we continue to take on, and it recycles generations and generations of homelessness and people not being able to receive their education, not being able to afford the ability that everyone else in the country has. And so I want you all to really think about taking on this challenge and investing and thinking about changing somebody's lives and thinking about if you were in their shoes and how could you really help. I don't think that if I didn't have the help that I did, that I would be here and I would know that I was worth something and that I was able to be something. And as recently stated, I just graduated from Georgetown. I'll be heading into law school next year. And Thank you. I know this wouldn't be possible without help. And so for each person in the room, just try to help and contribute as much as possible and as much as you can, because every little bit of help makes a difference. And we really appreciate it. And now I would like to turn over the mic to a woman who charged her administration to really focus and help the homeless population, which, I mean, I don't even know how to express it in words, how much we thank you. But I'm Mayor Muriel Bowser.
Wow. I'm compelled to be brief after those remarks, because Rashema really put the fine point on why we are here today. And as you will know when you meet Rashema and when you meet other wonderful Washingtonians, because people are experiencing homelessness does not mean that they are defective people, does it? And too often our society, as Rashema said, put people in a category of being different, of being other, of being less than, of being not worthy, of being nuisances, being misfits, and not being our neighbor. And that is exactly a mindset that we have been tackling in the days that we set a very big goal to end homelessness in our city. Let me acknowledge my team that Rashema acknowledged, because I did indeed give them a big task, but they give me even bigger ideas, and that is why we have been successful, and with your help, we will continue to be successful in our city. So let me acknowledge Kristy Greenwalt, who is the Executive Director of the ICH in Washington, D.C., Laura Zeilinger, who is the Director of the Department of Human Services, Polly Donaldson, who is the Director of DHCD, and Wayne Turnage, who's the Deputy Mayor for Housing, for Health and Human Services, DMHHS. And I also want to thank the entire team here at the Community Foundation for their leadership and commitment to working with us in DC government to end homelessness in our city. We know that for many of our neighbors experiencing homelessness, some have complex medical conditions, are frequent users of our Health and Human Services, and our entire team, our Health and Human Services team, who I've just introduced, are focused on stable housing, because we know that allows our residents to take care of everything else in their lives, from education to finding good, sustainable employment, and for taking care of their health. When I took office in 2015, I had a number of 90-day goals, things that we knew we needed to get done quickly if we were going to make real progress in my first term. In developing these goals, I charged the ICH with putting together a strategic plan to guide our way out of what was, at the time, a rapidly escalating homelessness crisis in our city. And just 3 months into our first year in office, with Kristy's leadership and the outstanding commission, the Homeward DC plan was released, and then we got to work funding it. 3 years into our full implementation, our city is headed in the right direction. Just last month, we released the results of our 2019 point-in-time count. What we saw was that between 2016 and 2019 is that we have been able to drive down overall homelessness in the city by 22%, driven by a nearly 45% reduction in family homelessness. Within our family system, we have scaled prevention services. We made good on our promise to close DC General and replace it with smaller, service-enriched, short-term family housing across all 8 wards of Washington, D.C. And most importantly, we have made sure that for every single family entering shelter, we have the assistance and resources in place to move them back out into housing of their own. So within our system that serves single adults, we began our efforts with a focus on residents experiencing chronic homelessness, our neighbors with the longest histories of homelessness, the most significant conditions, and the most intense barriers to getting housed. So today, we are also proud that over 5,000 single adults have exited the streets or shelters to permanent housing over the last 4 years. And between 2018 and 2019, we saw a 13% reduction in chronic homelessness as well. The number of people experiencing chronic homelessness in the district is lower today than it has been in 15 years. So that's good news. Our system is working better to target resources to those who need them the most. But we are all also focused on warning signs too. And we would be foolish not to pay very close attention and act. Despite this infusion of new housing resources and despite our reductions in chronic homelessness, the number of single adults touching our homeless services system has grown each year. Income inequality continues to intensify. No longer is simply having a job enough to protect a person or a family against homelessness. And our single adult population is aging. Seniors and persons with disabilities are entering our shelters at alarming rates. So we know we must do more and we must do it faster, and that's exactly why we're here today. We're going to need thousands of units of new housing in the years ahead. In fact, we in the district have set a very specific goal. We need 36,000 new units by 2025. And especially when it comes to deeply affordable and supportive housing, the government will always have a central role to play, but we can't do it alone. Similar to our approach to closing DC General and asking every part of the city to be a part of the solution, we will ask every part of the city to be a part of our 36,000 unit goal. We will explore flexible funding, gap financing, data, and tech support to enhance our ability to build these units. We are at a critical moment in time. Within DC government, we have reworked policies, stood up new programs, and grown our internal capacity. We are ready to do more, and we must do more, but we need your support as well. The government can do a lot. I say that frequently. And in fact, all of the investments I just described are in our homeless services system. We have made similar dramatic improvements to our system and investments on the affordable housing side so that we're producing more units. We also, on the government side, can't take our foot off the gas in funding how we produce and preserve units in the district. We also think that we have become better partners to the private sector. And you know, and you can count on how we're going to get involved in the financing of affordable housing from year to year, the amounts of money that will be available from year to year, and you can count on us being out in front to make sure that we can get these projects done. So I'd ask you to do it for me, but we're going to do it for Rashema and for Washingtonians who deserve a fair shot in our city. We are living in many ways in the best of times in Washington. Look around you. But in other ways, we're living in the most challenging times where people who have good jobs are getting further ahead of people who just want a chance. So with that, count on us, Count on us to be just as bold or even bolder this go around to get things done in building housing and make sure people are living safe, happy, prosperous lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. We certainly appreciate your leadership and the dedication of your entire team to this important work. And Rashema's presence, accomplishments, and grace are certainly worthy of acknowledgement. The good news in all that we've heard today is that homelessness is solvable. And we know that housing, the right housing, is the solution. We are sitting in the nation's capital, the center of the free world, and we are uniquely placed to end homelessness and offer a signal to the rest of the country that this is possible. Our colleagues from the West Coast today affirmed the urgent need for an all-hands-on-deck approach. This is our shared civic responsibility, and individual, institutional, and corporate commitments can complement the work of government and accelerate the pace of getting to the solution. So this is why we've come together. The Community Foundation and the Interagency Council on Homelessness are well positioned to engage new partners, coordinate cross-sector initiatives to further drive the district's plan to change systems and bring solutions to scale. The Community Foundation has invested over $1 billion into this community over the last 45 years. And we've been recognized for our leadership in galvanizing philanthropy alongside business and local government to address the most pressing community needs. This includes supporting victims and families of the 9/11 attacks on the Pentagon and the 2008 economic crisis in our region, and most recently, the federal shutdown. And for us, the fact that any one of our neighbors is sleeping outside is tantamount to a crisis. The Interagency Council on Homelessness includes cabinet-level officials, community representatives, and people with lived experiences. It facilitates cross-sector coordination to inform and guide the district's strategies and policies. Our joint ambition with this initiative is to bring to bear the private sector. We want your voice, your ingenuity, and your resources. We want to unite the public and private sectors around a shared strategy to accelerate our community's response to addressing homelessness and housing insecurity. Together, we will work to ensure that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring for the life of DC residents. And so, our strategy is to increase the supply of deeply affordable and permanent supportive housing for extremely low and no-income residents, to strengthen capacity of nonprofits who support our neighbors as they are exiting homelessness, to change public perceptions through donor education, community engagement, partnerships with media for solutions-based journalism, and through advocacy efforts, and to provide nimble, strategic, and sustained investment in the homeless service system. Based on what we learned during the planning phase of this partnership, we landed on 3 investment vehicles. A grant fund that will invest in nonprofits working with individuals, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. It will provide flexible funding to fill critical gaps, often small expenses that government resources can't cover, like amenities fees, rental fee applications, basic household furnishings, moving expenses, and other costs, such as those to recover identity that may have been lost in moving from one place to another. It will also support capacity development and emerging needs and advocacy efforts focused on strengthening policies that impact homelessness and housing. The partnership will release its first competitive grant application this coming August. Our impact investment options will make it possible for donors to earn a fixed return while providing financing to organizations building, preserving deeply affordable housing, deeply affordable and supportive housing. At the end of the impact note term, any principal and interest due are returned and can be reinvested or granted to support homelessness or other worthy causes. The third vehicle is a revolving loan fund, which is currently in design phase. So we're not asking for $1 billion today, not yet. We're looking to raise $35 million over the next 3 years as the initial philanthropic response to ending homelessness. And finally, as you've heard today, perhaps even more significant beyond the financial investment is our commitment to shifting the narrative on who in our community is experiencing homelessness and why, to remove stigma, race-based stereotypes, and NIMBYism, all in recognition that we all deserve a place to call home. So now all that's missing is you. We invite you to have a seat at the table. You can be our champions, like our colleagues from Zillow and Cisco and Salesforce and Kaiser have signed up to be champions. We're inviting you to be our champions. We need your voice, your jobs, your philanthropy, and your partnership. We're extending the opportunity to you today. There's a note card on each of your tables. If you could complete it, we will be happy to follow up with you on the next steps for how you can obtain a seat at the table for the partnership to end homelessness. Thank you, Mayor Bowser, again, for your leadership. It is amazing that we have the political leadership, and now it's up for us to get the community and the private sector leadership on board. Thank you for spending your day with us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to working with you in the very near future.